Hi, just wanted to talk a bit more around this Teams bot that had a video on recently, and wanted to cover off this answer that you get when you actually ask a question that we haven't added to the Q&A bot. So one of the things we want to be able to do is notify people to actually then update the Q&A bot to provide an answer. So in this case, I've asked for how to conduct an interview. And it's come back obviously and said there isn't an answer because I didn't have one in my QnAMaker. And to actually add this, I would need to actually tell someone about this this actual answer coming back. So the actual page that I want to return is probably this interview templates, which has different files of questions you can ask different people at different levels when they start the organization. So I need to get this into the Q&A bot, but I also need to inform somebody, which will probably be Kushla in this case, to actually do something in the background and add this to the Q&A bot. Now if I go into Azure, we actually have a trace running at the back of the Q&A bot, and it's actually picking up everything that people ask and storing those. And these are captured as traces. So in Azure, I can go into the portal, and if I was an admin, I can look at this trace, and I can see my question of how to conduct interviews. And then it come back and it said there was no good match found in the KBA, and the score here was 0. I mean, this is great for an Azure administrator, but not much good for somebody who doesn't know how to use Azure. So from this, I can actually create rules to then send out a notification. So in this case, I created a rule here where if the Q&A has a score less than 50, so in this case, not just 0, I want to know if the confidence level of the question was less than 0, then I want it to also notify somebody. So in here I can put in a query. So in this case it's part of the traces, and I have to convert the score here to a double, so into a number, to then test where it's less than 50. And it shows me on the chart here how many of these have occurred recently. So there's the one here that I was testing earlier. So this is great because then you can set up an action group, and you can create an email or create a webhook or something to be able to then send a notification. So this was how I started doing this. But the email you receive is actually quite difficult to read. So if we look at the email that Azure sends me, this is an example of one previously that's generated by that alert, which is, yes, it has all the information, but can't really expect someone to be able to understand this section, which actually contains the question and some other details related to it in terms of what was actually answered and also what the score was. So this started off as the first way of doing this, and then I discovered you can actually do this via Microsoft Flow. So in Flow, there's actually now an Azure Application Insights connector that you can use to make a query. And in fact, if you go to Flows and create a new flow, type in Application Insights, then it'll actually come up with an example, which is exactly this one that I've used here. I just modify my query. So if I go into this particular flow, it's running exactly the same query as it was inside that alert, and what I'm asking it to do is return this as a table. But you can also get it back as a chart as well, so you can actually generate the chart from this and send somebody that if it was useful. And you then put in a time range that you wanted to run it over. I run this under a reoccurrence, and it runs at 7 AM every day. In this case, as I created the flow, it gets my profile, but I may want to send an email to somebody else. So for instance, somebody who's responsible for updating the QnAMaker. Or alternatively, rather than sending an email, I could actually post a message into Teams. and notify a team to actually go in and make updates. So in this case, I just grab the body from this analytics, and then that sends me an email. So now, instead of that previous email that I got, I now get something that's slightly more readable, although in a very long table. The key points are actually broken out a bit more simpler into columns. If I wanted to, within the flow also, I could actually manipulate this some more and then just extract this particular section of the custom dimensions, and then just pull out what the question was and what the score was. So this gives me much more flexibility using Flow to be able to send notifications to people rather than using the Azure alerts, and has a whole opportunity to use this particular connector for all sorts of Azure analytics and monitoring. Anyway, so that's how we round out the solution of the Q&A bot. So it now actually notifies people when the scores are too low, and they can then go in and add additional Q&A answers to questions that people have by going into the QnAMaker, bringing up the previous Q&A that they had, and then add a new Q&A pair for how do I conduct interviews. Or alternative, they might ask for interview questions, and then the answer here is you can find the interview templates here. And what I'm going to do is put in the link to that SharePoint page, which is here, and then add that to the QnAMaker. So then once this is then, so we save and train it so it knows what sort of questions might map to this particular Q&A that I've just made. And then once that has trained itself, I could go through testing again to make sure that turns up correctly, and then finally publish this so the next person who asks that question will actually get the correct answer. So here we just go through and publish, and this should only take a minute, and literally it does. So I can then go back to Teams and say, are our interview questions, or what are good interview questions, and then I'll get a response and a link to go to the page. Thank you for listening.